guys, and welcome back to Bridge the Gap. My name is Jessica Likewise, and I'm the CEO of Hope Education Services. I've been working with kids with autism for the last 12 years. I started working with kids in 2008. At that time, an adult would have been born before 1990. Well, in 1990, the numbers of autism were believed to have been 1 in 10,000, and Facebook was still not even a thought, right? So what that meant is that there was no unified community of adults with autism to share what autism is really like. And a lot of really well-intended professionals did their best to help children. But in doing so, we made some mistakes, and we also made some assumptions about autism that just aren't true. And so this is the first ever TV series, where I'm bringing on adults with autism to have an open and honest conversation about what autism is really like, and where we've gone right and what we're getting wrong as professionals. And my goal is to unify the community of adults with autism and professionals who work with children with autism so everyone can have a better experience. So I am so excited to bring this person on today. He is an amazing person. He is an influencer in the autism acceptance community on Facebook. And I've just been so inspired by him. He has an autism video series. I watched it, and he was one of the first people I actually reached out to be on the show. And I have really, really wanted to have him on. He's an amazing individual, and I'm really excited to bring him on. So Jeff Snyder, welcome to the call today.
Thank you.
Awesome. So Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with getting a diagnosis of autism, and take us through, like, from your early memories of what it was like to have autism as a child.
Well, when I was diagnosed with autism, I was diagnosed at 21 months old in late 1990, early 1991, and back in the day, autism, like you said, was 1 in 10,000, and back then, autism was kind of a scary thing. There was not a whole lot, there was not a whole lot of dialogue and all that stuff about it, but I mean, right away, after my diagnosis, the wheels were set in motion for me to be placed on an IEP. I was placed in special education programs. First I went to preschool in North Providence, Rhode Island, which is where I live about 10 minutes away. So I was in North Providence throughout my preschool, and then I went into regular preschool in my hometown of Seekonk, Massachusetts, in late 1993, early 1994, and I enrolled in the Seekonk public school system from 1994 until I graduated in 2007. And believe it or not, I'm actually the first autistic student, first autistic in the town of Seekonk to go through the entire Seekonk public school system.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're like what they call, right, the OG, like one of the original gangsters of people with autism. And I actually didn't realize, I had said 1990, that's when you got your diagnosis. Yeah. So what that means is that you were really one of the first people to really go through, and I'm going to put it in quote unquote, because I know this is just kind of a whole conversation in and of itself, but like autism treatment. And you were one of the very first people. So 1987 was the very first time that treatment for autism came out. And so you kind of went through the early phases. And what it looked like back then is not what it looks like today. Now, we actually call it the same thing, but it really isn't the same thing. So my background is in ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. A lot of people who went through it in the early stages, like yourself, they have a negative connotation for what it means. Whereas today, truthfully, you would probably just think we were playing with kids, and there's little subtle nuances we do that you'd have to be really trained to even notice. But back then it looked very different. So what did the therapies look like? And what therapies did you get back then in the early 90s?
Well, when I was a kid, part of my therapies was I went to a rehabilitation school called Meeting Street, and they would get me involved in like various occupational therapies. And one of the things that I remember the most is was that they had like what they call the hot dog swing. And I would, that would be to test my, my balance and all that sort of stuff. And then when I was in school, during my schooling, I was in speech therapy. I was in occupational therapy. So all these things were like, like I was frequently tested, in the sense that I had been, I those were the things that I was basically involved in, was occupational and speech therapy. And I was also, as part of my IEP, I was also tested with identifying pictures and all that sort of stuff. So
Yeah. And so, that early experience in therapy, maybe you weren't quite getting ABA yet. It wasn't accessible to a lot of people back then. But overall, the therapies and services you got and the teachers that you had, and I mean, obviously there's good and there's bad in everything, but overall, would you say that it was a positive experience for you, or if it was it a negative experience?
I would say it was a positive experience. I benefited. When I did the therapies, I was kind of, it was kind of slow in the beginning, but then it gradually picked up as I got older. So
Yeah, awesome. And so what would you say, like what advice would you give someone like me who is a professional and who does work with people with autism, particularly kids with autism, that wants to do a really good job? What if you were to tell me, hey, there's one thing I really wish you knew or I wish my teachers knew when I was a kid, what would that one piece of advice be that you could give a therapist?
well, one thing I would give mostly is, to see things from the kid's point of view. I mean, because I think a lot of what is troubling between autistic kids and neurotypicals is that a lot of neurotypicals don't really understand what is going through the mind of the kid, and they'll give it an assumption and all that sort of and all that jazz. But that's what I think is because some kids, I know for myself, I tend to have trouble explaining. I tend to have trouble, explaining things which are sometimes important, and that kind of throws me off a little bit. And so that's one thing that I would personally recommend, is to give a sense of understanding, for to give a therapist a sense of understanding of what the child is going through, what's going through the mind of the child. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, just so you know, you're doing a great job explaining to us right now. So, and I really do appreciate you. And I've listened to a few of your videos, and including the one you did today, on Get Families Getting Together. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because, this show is airing. So if you are watching the show, maybe it's the first time, maybe you just found it on YouTube. It does premieres on Facebook at 9 p.m. Eastern Time every Sunday. It also is on local television in New Jersey, which also airs at 9 p.m. So if you're watching this live, you can check it out there. Just so you know, my YouTube channel is getautismanswers.com. But, just so for anyone who was watching, but, one of the things I love about what you talk about is it's the holiday season. So when this is premiering, this is going to be on December 8th is when this is going on. Today's the day before Thanksgiving is when we're recording this. So families are getting together. There's a lot of holiday parties, Christmas parties, and all of this stuff, whether it's or Hanukkah parties or whatever stuff is going on, that can be really hard for people with autism. And I think that parents know that. And, last year I put out this video that said, okay, here's some ways you can help to make things easier for your child with autism going through these holiday seasons. But can you give us a little bit for you, why is it difficult? Why are holidays difficult? Why are gatherings difficult? Why is the whole Christmas season stressful? What about it stressful? And then also what can we do to alleviate some of that stress for kids?
Well, it's like I said in my video this morning. I think a good way for someone with autism to cope with, large family gatherings is to wear, like, like when I do family gatherings, I usually wear headphones or earbuds. And sometimes, I think some people will kind of view that as, oh, this kid's being, or, oh, he's being rude, he's ignoring, not being social. But, there's a lot of people with autism, tend to have sensory issues. And sometimes you'll get that, annoying, like, little cousin, or the uncle that, aunt or uncle that just won't leave you alone. Believe me, both my parents came from very large families, with as many as like they had like seven other siblings. So our family gatherings tend to be very large, and especially during Christmas, you've already been through the process of, oh, this is you've been through the process of, going out into the general public, you're dealing with a lot of stimulation, and then you have to go to then you go to Christmas Day, and you have like 20 people over at your house, and there will be people that will want to talk to you, wish you Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and so on. So that's one thing that's one thing that a lot of neurotypicals tend to forget. And what I think that they need to understand is that not everyone on the spectrum not everyone they know is going to act the same way as they do. So.
Yeah, and that's some really good advice. And you bring up the sensory issues, and that's something that I think a lot of neurotypical people may not fully understand. I can actually relate to that, and I know that I actually do have myself. I get overwhelmed with sensory stimulus. For me, it's like when there's music that has multiple different beats to it, it kind of like makes my head spin and go crazy. So I actually kind of do know a little bit, to some degree, what it's like to have like sensorily overload. Obviously not to the degree where some people cause real serious distress and it's causing a meltdown. But for people often that are, like you said, neurotypical, they'll look at someone who has autism and maybe they're having a meltdown and they're having a sensory overload, and it looks like a tantrum, or it looks like they're just being, bad, quote unquote, and you hear people will tell parents like, oh, well, if you just disciplined your kid, they wouldn't be doing that. So, and we know that's not really true, right? But can you articulate for us, at least for you, what does that sensory overload feel like? So parents who maybe are going through this for the first time and that are watching this with younger children can kind of have an idea of what their child's experiencing, so they can be more empathetic when helping them to cope with it.
Well, I mean, I think what was going through the mind of the child is that, or adult or whatever, is that sometimes I think when they do sensory overloads, their brains tend to, go like 10,000 miles an hour. And then you've got like people from different directions, trying to talk to you. And sometimes, your brain will get overwhelmed and you start to, get like lumps in your throat. And believe me, this has happened to me. As a matter of fact, it happened to me this past February. I was vacationing in Florida, and we visited. I have an uncle that lives up in Venice, and I also have relatives that live in Northeast Florida, right by Daytona Beach. And there was so much activity going on, and I couldn't, and I got so much. I had so much information processing that I just broke down. I just had a meltdown, and it was a mild meltdown. And I do take lorazepam. So I took that, and that kind of helped me out of it. But it left me drained for the rest of the time we were visiting them. And I mean, and I have to tell you right now, Jessica, meltdowns are not fun. Period. I mean, I've had meltdowns, and they are not fun at all.
Yeah, and I worked with a child today, one of the children I worked with today did have this meltdown. And afterwards, I felt bad for him because, and I knew that the stress of what we were doing caused it. And it's hard because you want to push someone to their limit, but you don't want to push them over their edge either.
Absolutely.
And, in this particular child, I know that he had to have something going on before we started. In this case, I asked him to do something very simple, and he, just for whatever reason, 99 out of 100 other times would have done it, but he just couldn't in that moment. And so for me, I'm watching this child totally break down, and I intellectually understand, okay, this is right now, he's unable to control himself. He's unable to be in control of his behavior. And right now, this child is just, he's not trying, right, to act out. But in the same sense, it's so hard without being able to relate to, what does that feel like? So for you, from your perspective, would you consider today, like when we were working with that child, did he have a tantrum? Was he just not listening, or was it just that he literally physically couldn't respond in that moment?
I mean, I wouldn't say that. Sometimes for people with autism, some of them are nonverbal, and when they're having sensory issues, they have trouble communicating. If they're low functioning or nonverbal, or in the case of myself, I'm high functioning, but I still tend to, one of the things that I tend to do sometimes when I'm in situations like that, particularly with family situations, is I try to mask my emotions. And when I mask my emotions, I'm trying to, hide, the true feelings. I'm trying to say, I'm fine. I'm not having a meltdown, but there comes a point where you can't hold on to that much longer, and ultimately you end up giving into your emotions. So.
And do you wish that you didn't have to mask your emotions, that people were just more accepting of who you were and understood better what you were going through?
Oh yeah, definitely. I wish everybody would understand, but unfortunately, not everyone is going to understand. And sadly, it's just the way it is. Some people want their kids to act a certain way, and that ultimately causes trouble in families. So.
Yeah, and it is my goal of this show that more people would understand. And that's the goal of getting this message out there, is because, as parents and professionals, we often see something, but we're making judgments based upon what we see. And in a sense, it's all we can really do. But knowing how a person feels and knowing why a person's doing what they're doing is so much more important than what we can observe, because it really will help us to respond better.
Yes.
And on that note, and I have parents ask me this all the time, where, if a child is, let's say they're stimming with a toy, and let's just say, for example, they have a fidget spinner, they're spinning it and they're spinning it and they're spinning it and they're spinning it. And then the parent takes it away for whatever reason, they need to take it away. And the child just starts having this huge tantrum and crying and screaming and yelling. And parents will look at me and say, is this like them being the terrible twos? Like, am I supposed to discipline them, or am I supposed to comfort them because they're having a meltdown? And, for you, what would you say to that parent who asked that question? Because I get that question all the time, and I always give the parent a response, but I want to know what your response would be.
If I was the parent, I can understand, because you don't want, most parents would want their kids to stop playing with toys at a certain age, but you're gonna have a kid or an adult who likes the toy so much that they stim with it. It's part of who they are. So to take away the fidget spinner, like you said, you're taking away the kid's way of coping. You're basically throwing them to the wolves, and you just can't do that. If they want to play with the fidget spinner, let them play with the fidget spinner, whether you like it or not. So,
Yeah, no, and that's a great point in terms of, like, developmentally, sometimes we force social norms that we think it's like, oh, well, it's no longer appropriate for a child to watch whatever it is, Thomas the Train at 7, so we're not going to let them watch it. And I always tell parents not to do that. But I meant more of like in the moment, let's say like the child needs to eat lunch and like, you have a 2-year-old and the 2-year-old, it's time for the 2-year-old to go in the high chair and eat lunch, and they can't physically feed themselves and spin the fidget spinner. So the parent takes it away for lunchtime for 15, 20 minutes and with the intention of giving it back. What would you say to a parent in that particular sense?
Well, I would say probably, I just want, just to give I would say to the parent, for them to, tell their kid, we do not, we're going to, ask you to put down the fidget spinner while you have lunch. And then once you're done with lunch, then we can give the fidget spinner back to you. So,
Okay. So giving those warnings and the transitional warnings.
Yeah.
To help them cope with it, so they know it's not forever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's hard because children don't often have the maturity to understand that like something that's being taken away is actually going to be given back to them. So they can get very frustrated. And this particular child I'm thinking about, even just working with like requesting and choice boards, even I have a hard time because I don't want to give him something and then just take it away and make him ask for it, which is one of the premises of ABA. When I know he's going to get upset because he doesn't really fully understand what I'm doing, and he doesn't fully understand that I'm going to give it right back. So for me, I always say to other therapists or parents, you want to wait to be able to even do that type of instruction so you're not causing the child emotional stress and trauma by having them not really understand what you're doing, because it may just come across as like you're teasing them, right? And it's like, if we wouldn't tease a dog with food and pull it in front of them and push it back because we know we'd get bitten. And yet sometimes unintentionally we're doing the same thing with kids because we're not the ones suffering the consequences of it.
Absolutely.
So that brings up a really, really good point. So is there anything, like I said, you were an influencer in the autism acceptance community. Is there anything that you want people to know who are watching this? Maybe they're neurotypical, maybe they've heard of autism, maybe they do associate it with children, but they don't really know much about the idea of just wanting to be accepted for who you are. Can you share us a little bit about your group on Facebook, why you started it, what that movement means to you?
Well, I think, part of the reason why I formed Jeff Snyder Autism Self-Advocate is because I want people to, because I want to try to educate people, that autism is not this, disease or, something that can be cured, but it's something that needs to be accepted. And I get a lot of like, I have a lot of like, mothers and, even people on the spectrum, join this group, and I post, I post like, stuff that goes on in like schools and all that, just to make people aware of what should not be happening to people on the spectrum, because as a matter of fact, there's like, there was a couple stories mostly in the UK where there's instances where kids are put in like seclusion rooms, and it gets a lot of like, there's two sides to a story. One side is that it was the student's fault, and the other side is the teacher's fault. One of the things that I'm trying to get the message across is that if people need to accept autism for who it is. I mean, there's no reason for people to be cured or things of that sort. I mean, look at me. I'm 30 years old, and I'm proud of my autism. I mean, yes, I've had my weak moments with autism, but it's made me, it's given me it's opened a lot of doors for me that have never been opened. So.
Yeah, and I know that's like one of the big dilemmas, I think, in autism. You talked about high functioning versus low functioning autism. And I've used the example before that it's really hard to look at someone like you and say, well, yeah, we need to treat the autism, because we don't need to treat it. We need to accept you and love you for who you are and recognize the valuable contributions that you make to society, and be okay with the fact that you may do things just a little bit differently. And it doesn't make you any less important or valuable, or, and then we have another spectrum, and it's not that they're any less valuable or important, but they really do need help. And I spoke to a parent today, and the child, I think, is having surgery number 19 because they're eating foreign objects and they're at risk of like death. And this child is, self-injurious. They're harming themselves to the point that at some points they have to physically restrain them by literally using like manual restraints, and not even a person can do it, to keep this person from physically causing themselves serious bodily injury. Now, obviously, that's a complete extreme situation, but oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but there are times where autism does look like that. And a lot of times that means there's comorbid conditions going on. It's not stemming just from the autism, but it's hard because you have so opposite things happening. And then you have people saying, well, we want to have autism acceptance and it doesn't need to be treated. And then you have these situations where parents are at their wits' end trying to keep their child alive. You can't tell that mother, well, autism doesn't need to be treated, when their child, and they're literally just trying to keep their child alive. So, what do you think about that idea of autism treatment, and how can we reconcile those differences to make it, what words do we need to use, or how do we need to approach it so that way people who are getting the support that they really truly do need are getting it, and we're recognizing, the limitations and really what could potentially be a serious medical problem. But then for people like yourself on the opposite side of the spectrum, we are giving you the support you needed, but not looking at you as something to be cured.
Personally, I would say that, I mean, you do bring up a good point, Jessica, about the kid being the foreign objects. I mean, I get that, but I mean, I think what the treatment of autism is, personally, I think the treatments are to help the kid or adult with autism channel their disability, teach them, how to control it, because sometimes, like autism, particularly when it comes to like, later in life, like dating or something, how do you control your autism, when you date, it's all about the self-control. And if you can self-control your autism, and it would probably, in a sense, it would probably make sense, like, for autism, for like dating, or like driving a car, it's all about controlling. It's all about, learning to control your autism in certain aspects, be autistic, let people accept you for who you are, but, control it in certain areas.
Yeah, and that's a really great, way to say it. And so when I first started in working with ABA and working with kids with autism, it's when the term recovery started coming around, where kids would recover from autism. And I think that term is not used as much today. But, in treatment and in intervention and all these different words, depending upon where you live, what they call it, what would you like, if you had to pick a way that we had to kind of end for tonight, if there was a way that you could kind of phrase the support, what would we call it? Autism what?
I would definitely call it autism acceptance. I mean, definitely, it's autism acceptance, it's part of who we are. It's not going anywhere. And, we have to learn to live with it. And for some people, they're in denial about it, and some are more than willing to accept it for what it is. We need to have more acceptance, people accepting autism, than people denying it.
Yeah, and I do believe that, and I didn't believe that. And I'm going to go on the record with saying that I didn't believe that when I first started. And I thought autism was something to be cured, and I thought it was something to recover kids from. And that's how I approached my treatment in the beginning. And I think a lot of people still are approaching it that way. But today, I do believe that autism is something to be accepted. And I also believe that we can help people to develop skills, and we can help them to reach their highest potential and hold them in their highest possibility while still accepting them and loving them for who they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the point, right, of this show, Bridge the Gap, to kind of figure out what that looks like. So that way all professionals do a better job. And so that way that there's not, and you and I both know, right, there are adults with autism that look at autism professionals and they don't like what we've done and they don't like what we're doing. And they'll, say like, hey, you guys don't do this and you're not accepting us and loving us. I don't want that division to be there. I want to bridge that gap, right? Like this show says, so that way everyone stands together and kind of works for the same cause and the same purpose.
I mean, I'm looking to, recently, a couple weeks ago, actually, I was at a conference, neuroscience conference out in San Diego, and I was part of a panel where your audience are all medical professionals and parents who have never, some of them have never even, they know who autism is, but they've never actually met a person with autism. So me and four other people, one of them communicates through an iPad, and he's 14 years old. So, we were asking, we were answering questions from the audience. And one of the things that I said was that I think some medical professionals need to learn a little bit more about autism and neurodiversity and all that. So
yeah,
and I called it the words I said were, there needs to be advanced placement AP courses for autism. That's how I put it. So
well, that's a really great way to say it, and I really hope that this show serves that purpose.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on and being a guest today. It was such a privilege to interview you.
My pleasure.
So again, if you're watching this for the first time, this has been an episode of Bridge the Gap. My name is Jessica Likewise. I'm the CEO of Hope Education Services. I'm an autism professional, and I've created this platform for adults with autism to come on and have open, honest conversations about autism awareness, autism acceptance, and my goal is that truly there's more understanding for what autism is, what adults with autism are experiencing, and really that I can learn to be better, and I already have learned to be better from the amazing people I brought on. So if you're watching this live, thank you so much. If you're watching the recording every week, this is going to be on at 9 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be premiering on my YouTube channel. You can go to getautismanswers.com to learn a little bit more about it. So thanks so much, and I look forward to connecting with everyone there. Thanks again.